Okay, so I'm Allie. Thank you for coming out today. If you could just introduce yourself, and then we'll go from there.
Awesome. So thank you again for having me on the podcast. My name is Dahlia Cummings. I am, I guess, a life survivor, and I am the owner of Rebel Alchemy Life.
Okay, awesome. All right. So if you want to just get started and just kind of tell us from about your story from the very beginning. You mentioned that you are a life survivor. So if you could just give us an insight into what that kind of looks like.
Absolutely. So I kind of started off. With my name being Dahlia, I've always compared my life to the flower dahlia. Like you take a seed, shove it down in some, some soil, and you expect for it to sprout and bloom. And so I really feel like my life was like that. I was adopted uh, at 6 months into an abusive home. And so abuse falling up under verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual and mental abuse. I dealt with molestation and a lot of things like that growing up. So by the time I was, Jesus, even a preteen, I had no identity at all. And so, I was kind of obviously the black sheep. When you don't have any identity, you kind of don't know where to go. And so I ping pong through life, ping pong through relationships being used. I've been in, which allowed me to be in abusive relationships because I just did not know my self worth. I was homeless for a while I was figuring myself out, even to the point of creating a relationship simply to have some place to live. I ended up being a single mom, raised my daughter. She's now 25. That relationship again, so I was 100% single mom, did not have support from family, friends, or his family or himself. So it truly was just her and I. And I would say, even through that, even up to last year, I was hit with a stray bullet and had to figure out how to heal and come from that. And so, yeah, I've lived a life that is not necessarily ideal for most people and has had a lot of weight added onto it. And I've really had to figure out in each and every one of those circumstances, each and every one of those issues, how to continue to grow and just try to be the best version of Dahlia, or to find Dahlia and the best version of Dahlia through it all. So that's a little bit of of a summary. If you want me to break that down, I can.
So how does
So how does
somebody
somebody
even get through
even get
that?
through that? Well, first and foremost, I do have to attribute it all to my relationship with God. I will say that. If there was anything that was consistent about when I was being raised, was church. I did not necessarily agree with the practices that I saw, but I was still in the environment. And I've joked before that I believe he had a relationship with me long before I had a relationship with him. There was always this voice that kind of refused to allow me to just quit. There were times that I was so down that I thought about taking my life. And I would only go so far because there was a voice that just was pressing on me really, really hard not to quit. And so that has carried me through, hands down. That's been the golden wire through a lot of the trauma that I've experienced. And, I guess I can attribute it to him, but I would also say I just, for some reason, and maybe it's just my bloodline, I have a serious level of resilience, a serious level of I refuse to lose a mentality. And like a good example of that is when I had my daughter. Again, I was single parent, which meant initially I was on the system. I was getting food stamps, WIC, which is women, infants, and children, that helps you, purchase milk, etc. And I always worked. And they would keep calling me into the office like every 2 months to reprove that I still had my job. And it was interrupting my job. Like at a certain point, your job is like, look, you just keep taking these random days off. You only get so much PTO. And I just chose to completely get off the system, like cold turkey. And I literally remember standing in the window looking outside, like, I just choose peace of mind. I don't know how we're going to do it with no assistance. I don't have a clue how we're going to make it through, but I cannot continue to feel like I'm in a box where I can't breathe, I can't grow. So I've just always had this inner fight that definitely has carried me through, um, and allowed me, I think, to compartmentalize a lot of things when I was going through it or when I needed to flick the switch of survival, that I could just go over here and kind of tuck the emotional part away while I needed to, and then eventually come back around and deal with the emotions that were associated with what I did.
Right.
Right.
And I
Right.
can't even imagine how hard that would be, because a lot of people um, who don't go through that much, or even who do, unfortunately, a lot of them don't have that resilience. So thank you for sharing that. Once you got out of that sort of situation, did you ever go and find help, or were you ever able to talk to anybody during that time of trauma?
So what's interesting is my relationship with therapists has always been challenging, but it's not because I don't believe in the work. It's because of how my relationship started. So when I was at home, the I was always told that I was the problem. So I was put in therapy very early. And as a child, and therapy has grown, it has changed, it has evolved. But this was back in late 70s, early 80s, where whatever the parents said was the truth. So, the her narrative was I was the problem, which meant that I was going to therapy, and that was essentially just being reinforced. And so I was either very quiet, or I just wouldn't tell my perspective of what was happening. And when I would get tired of them telling me that I'm the problem and trying to fix me, and start to actually use my voice as far as like, well, no, this is actually what's happening. Inevitably, they would then be like, oh, they would connect with her, and then the therapy session would end. And then I would be placed with another therapist who would start the process over of telling me that I was the problem. So when I finally got to a place as far as in adulthood, because I did not try to go to therapy again until after I had my daughter, it at that point, people were so surprised, therapists were so surprised to hear my story, that it ended up not even really being therapy sessions. It ended up being more like I had a therapist tell me that I should be a case study. And nobody wants to hear that in their in their therapy session. Like, yo, guy, you should be a case study. And that's how I felt like I got treated a lot. I recognized that my story was a bit crazy, or could be a bit crazy, but I also was the person that lived it. So I had a therapist tell me that she was surprised that I was still alive. So I just have not necessarily had the best relationship with therapists. So even when I went through my experience last year of being hit with a stray bullet, there's a level of trauma and PTSD that comes with that, that is beyond. I went a long time even being terrified to go back outside. My brain was like telling me that I'm a target. So if I would hear any sort of, and I live in Texas, so that means it's all kind of pows going on all the time, even if it's just friendly, fire. And I tried therapy, and everyone was like, just get on medicine. You need to do, like, it was a very, we're just going to go from 0 to 100 real quick, not unpack what happened and just help you heal. And so I literally took medicine for a week, and I said I did not like feeling that disconnected from my body. And I put the medicine up, and every day I would still go outside, because again, I told you I have this crazy resilience that's like I refuse to just become a prisoner in my home because it's happened to me. But every time I would go outside and I would start to feel anxiety, I would literally just say, thank you, God, for healing my mind, my body, and my spirit. That is how I healed, to be able to maneuver fully through the city and not feel like a prisoner in my home. So while I definitely believe in therapy, because I see it when other people do it, for some reason, it's just not been something that has manifested as something positive in my life.
Right. And I think that's a really strong thing. Um, because yes, sometimes I feel like therapy isn't for everybody. It for me myself, it also took me a very long time to find a therapist. For years, I was like, okay, I just can't talk about myself to people because this is clearly not working. Like
Hmm.
it just didn't make sense. Um, and then, after I like to say dated my therapist, because it's pretty much what you're doing. You're talking to them, trying to get to know them. And I finally found one and I feel like I can talk to her. So it was like, huh, sometimes you just have to find what works for you or who works for you.
Hmm.
And I really like that yours is something that you can do yourself every day, multiple times a day if needed. And I think that will help a lot of people, especially the people who A, don't want to talk to anybody, or B, it just doesn't work. Sometimes it just doesn't work.
Yeah, I just feel like, again, I did my best to take ownership. I didn't deny the fact that I needed healing. Like I knew it. Like I couldn't deny that. I just knew that the typical path that people were trying to put me on was not the path that I wanted to be on. So I leaned on, what I've always trusted to be true. And it was an amazing experience because even though I would say it, I did not realize it was working. Like I would realize it was working in the moment. Like I would get anxious because when I was shot, it was literally at the corner of my street. So every time I would leave
Yeah.
the house, I would have to pass by the area. So and I went a long time with not liking just being because I was sitting in my car when I was hit. And so I would sit at a red light. I didn't like being in a situation where I was just stuck in my car. Like if I was moving, I was fine, but just sitting at a red light or waiting to turn, all of a sudden in my mind, I'm a target. Like I'm, looking around the corner, looking around. And I think there was one day I was driving when I realized that I hadn't said it.
Mm.
And at that point, I was like, oh, like I went this whole drive without that anxiety feeling. And it's not, perfect. There's still times today where I still, will get the feeling and have to go back to that. But I did my best to just address myself the way that I knew I needed to and just trusted that I'm like, this has got to work because I don't want to be on medicine. I don't want to numb the fear. I'd rather feel it and heal from it than just take a pill and, try to numb it or act like it's not there. So, but I would say the medicine, because I am a proponent of the medical industry, and I think the medicine it was powerful for at least getting me outside the first time. Um, and so I will never down that, but I think long term, I just am the type of person that would rather feel the feels and work through it. I don't care how dark, how heavy. I don't care how many days I have to cry because I feel like whatever that bucket is that I need to pour into, once it's done, and I don't have to go back. So,
Yeah, that's a really great way of looking at it, actually. Wow. So, can you tell us, like, what kind of questions or thoughts did you have going through your mind throughout your life? Um, sometimes we ask, you said you had a good relationship with God, and I know that sometimes we get that, why is this happening, or how come this happened, and we don't really have answers. So, did you have any questions like that?
yeah, and just to make sure that, for anyone that's watching, I think I said earlier, he had a relationship with me long before I had a relationship with him. And I was always the person that was obedient, but there were years I hated God. Like I just could not for the world understand. Like I need to understand your love. Like this is love, and and I was applying that to everything that I had gone through, everything that had been said to me, the tears that I had cried. And so I went a lot of years in this conflict space of like, again, there's a part of me that's telling me that you're good. There's a part of me that's leaning on me and just has a hold on me that you are my source. But there's also a part of me that's pissed off that I went through everything, you know. So I was like, I was constantly
Mhm.
in this space. And so I definitely asked why a lot. That was definitely my trigger question with him, is like, first, for a lot of years, especially for the earlier part of my life, it was, it definitely was the victim mentality of why me, you know, why, especially being adopted. Why did you let her adopt me? Why did you let these people in my life? Why was this okay? You want me to still worship you and love you, but it was okay for you to let XYZ happen. I would say the whole first quarter of my life was living in that level of why. And when I had my daughter, I said to myself, okay, I knew, I was very, very aware of the fact that when I had my daughter, not only did I have my daughter, obviously, because it was meant for me to have my daughter, um, but my daughter was also a gift to me to save me. When I had my daughter at 25. At that particular point, I was on such a downslide with, I don't understand why this happened to me, that I was also in the place of starting to accept that I am worth nothing. And so my daughter forced me to live outside of my reality, because I told you there's a resilience in me. So for me, it was like, oh, this is no longer about me. I have to make sure she's good. And because I had to make sure she was good, I also had to make sure that I didn't repeat the cycle. So
Right.
me having her started to prompt that forced healing that I needed to go through, because I did not want for her to have anywhere near the life that I had. And so I would say after that, after I had my daughter and I started to heal in certain ways, that it then became, it was still a why question, but it was more not why me with an attitude. It was more like, okay, well, why am I still here? Like, why do I seem to have this level of resilience? Especially because, raising my daughter, I would meet other parents and I would meet other families. And I was also volunteering at homeless shelters and things like that. So I would meet single parent families that were homeless. I would meet all of these people that were just completely down and out because of something that life took them through. And when they would share their story, you know, never downplaying anyone's story, but like, one woman's story was, she was in an abusive relationship. I also had been in an abusive relationship, but whatever occurred in her mind allowed it to take her out of her space and live on the street and just be willing to be homeless. So it was experiences like that while I was raising her that kind of made me start to look at myself like, okay, wait a second. Now, you're giving me one scenario that just completely broke you down that I'm helping you through. I've gone through at this particular point probably like 10, for years. What are you, God, what is it that either you've put in me, or what is it that you see in me that I don't see in myself? And so that started to unpack that line of questioning. And in pure transparency, the situation that happened with me being shot, honestly, I think was the culmination of that. Because while I would never wish anything like that on anyone, that situation snatched me out of my current reality. When I finally came back from the hospital and was able to just be back in my space, back in my home, was the first time that I was back in my life. And I was telling people, I said, I feel like I'm in the Twilight Zone. Like, things look the same. This is the same apartment. This is the same pond that I walk around, but something is different. And it felt very like, you're here, but this is not where you're supposed to be. And so that situation caused me to take a complete life shift, from ending relationships, changing friendships. It was just literally like, I would look in the mirror and just be like, I don't recognize myself. I look exactly, I see myself. This is the same face I remember from before this happened. But even though I'm still here, there was something in me that still died that day. And I just truly think it was the identity that I was holding on to from everything that I had gone through versus the identity that he had given me that I needed to step into.
Wow. That's really powerful. Thank you for sharing. A lot of that is a lot of people will probably won't even be able to wrap their minds around everything you just shared, but I truly appreciate it because you just never know what other people have gone through. Um, so you mentioned your daughter a few times. How do you think your experiences growing up shaped you to be a parent?
That was a journey of, like I said, of revelation. The first 3 years of my daughter's life, I was the same parent. It wasn't until she was 3 years old, and one time she got in trouble, and I just went from 0 to 100 real quick. And she looked at me. She was crying, and she looked at me, and it was the look in her eyes when she looked at me that shook me because I recognized the look. And it breaks my heart to this day, still remembering, like, that moment is just etched in my mind. And it was at that moment that I knew that something had to change, that I could not create that same level of trauma in her. And so we went through, literally at 3 years old, and you can just imagine the type of conversation this was. I had to tell my daughter, um, if mommy gets angry, I need you to just go to your room and play. Just, well, go to your room and shut the door. And I had explained to her, it's not because mommy doesn't love you. Like, I literally had to morph an adult mentality into a 3 year old, that mommy needs to heal. And in order for mommy to take care of you correctly, I need you to do this for me. And she went an entire year without any sort of discipline. My friends were telling me I was stupid. Like, you can't just have a kid and not. I mean, I got no support from anyone that was around me, because they're like, you're raising a kid, you can't do XYZ. But I knew, I said, no, at this particular point in time, I need to learn how to communicate. And I didn't know. And so she went an entire year without, and I mean, and of course she was 3. So that means, a 3 year old with no discipline. That means she was just like, oh, we're about to draw on walls. We're about to do all
Right.
kind of stuff. And she did. And every time, like, she would just draw on, like, I remember the situation of her drawing on the wall. And I sent her to her room for a little while, and until I settled in myself, and I said, okay, let me communicate to her and let's work together to bring this back. And the funniest thing is, she actually still remembers this moment of coming out of the room, and I'm like, hey, we don't draw on walls. I was like, we're going to get this cleaned up. And she says to me, oh, how fun. I'll clean the bottom, you clean the top. In the back of my mind, I was like, that was not the purpose of this. This is supposed to be a punishment. Like, but you're looking at it like bonding time. But it was those moments that kind of taught me a different way of parenting and learning how to communicate and giving chances, and not making her feel like because she did something wrong, she's an automatic failure and she's not worth my love. Um, and so, I mean, it definitely was a journey. And obviously, as she got older, it was different challenges that arose, but it was her at 3 years old. It was the look that she gave me at 3 years old that made me do a complete about face and start the hard work of being a parent that, even when she's 40, can still call me and talk to me, and we can still laugh and play and have those conversations. I said, I want my daughter. I knew at that point, I was like, my daughter will be an adult a lot longer than she's going to be a child. And so I need to make sure that I'm parenting her in a way that we will have a relationship for life. And I'm not just your parent, because at a certain point, what I learned is you go from parent to coach. They don't want you to parent them anymore. So all of that, like, I had to learn all of that stuff in the moment. And was it perfect? No. But there is one thing that, hands down, my daughter knows that I love her. She knows that, hands down, I will always have her back. She knows, hands down, I will drive. Right now, she's 1,200 miles away because we don't live in the same state. But she knows hands down that if she ever calls me and says, I need you, I'm in the car, on the plane, I'm doing something to get to her. And for me, coming from where I came from, that is, especially considering that my mother did not come see me when I was in the hospital and was shot. I'm like, I was almost at the end of life. And none of my family did anything to come see me. I didn't get flowers or anything. So for me, that is extreme growth. And I can only continue to hope and pray that as she continues to grow and eventually, decides to have children, that she'll be able to take at least the what I did not have, to be able to give her and move to the next level with her daughter. But I think that if I didn't go from 0 to 100, I at least went from 0 to 80. I at least went from 0 to 80 with how I was parented versus how I was able to give back to her.
Right. And I think that's great because sometimes it's really easy to just continue on, right? Because this is what you know. This is what you've been through years and years and years of your life. So I think it's really important to hone in on, even though, it did take 3 years, you recognize that and you changed. So it is possible. So I think that's
Yeah.
a nice dual message.
I mean, it's definitely possible, but I try to tell people, like I said, just especially with what I do now, it's work. Like you're going to have to face your demons. You're going to have to be willing to say the hard thing to yourself. You're going to have to be willing. Like I said, I put myself, she didn't get disciplined, but I essentially was on punishment for a year. Essentially, I put my own self on punishment. Like, this is not how we're going to do this. You need to sit down. Like, you need to figure this out because you have someone that's looking up that needs you to be the best you. So yeah, it's not an easy journey, but I don't, especially like I said now, considering our relationship and looking at her as the woman that she's becoming. Do I regret it? Absolutely not. I feel like this is exactly why I did it, so that we could call each other on a Saturday and just laugh for 30 minutes about stupid stuff like that. These are moments that I just did not have when she came down. Uh, when I was in the hospital, she stayed with me for a week before she had to go back home, and she washed my hair for me. And even though to people like, okay, I never got that opportunity. I was not even allowed to touch my mother's hair because my mother was partially Cherokee Indian. And in her mind, she for some reason seemed to rationalize, because her hair texture was completely different than mine, that if I messed with her hair, braided her hair, washed her hair, that it was wrong because her hair was different than mine. So when my mother would get sick, when things like that would happen, I was never allowed to have those small bonding moments with her to actually serve her as her daughter. And so it meant the world to me, as crazy as this may sound, that it took me to get shot. But I did not care because for me, it was like, oh my God, I was able to give my daughter this moment from that. I mean, she actually made fun of me. She was like, obviously you're in a hospital, you don't look cute. And I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. And when I was home like 2 days, and she was like, do you need me to do your hair? Like that, it was kind of like, and I was like, I mean, if you want to. And so it was a whole moment. She washed, conditioned, retwisted. My hair was was a little longer back then. But it was a whole moment that I, as a mother, cherished. I'm sure she will cherish this, as she looks back, as an adult. But again, it was a moment that I never had. So it's just something else on the list that I feel like I've been able to experience or give her that I just didn't have when I was growing up.
Right. And speaking of what you're doing now, would you like to just explain a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I initially lived in the HR and executive coaching space. Like I said, I've always had, just because of my life journey, I've always had insight into people. I had to read people to survive, essentially. And so those two fields were very natural for me to step in. I have since morphed that into my company, which is Rebel Alchemy Life. And I call myself a foundational coach. And what I mean when I say foundational is that my power in life comes from finding people's root and helping them connect to that space to own exactly who they are. And so whether I'm working with a company on how to give their employees the amount of space that they need to live in their foundational space and lead from authenticity, or whether I'm just working with an individual, and it's mostly women, my audience is mostly women, or whether it's just I'm working with an individual woman who is in a foundational space, whether that means she's a new manager and she's trying to figure out, like one of my clients is just a very happy person. She's just happy. Like, I don't understand that, but she's just happy. And when she first got into management, she hit that management wall of, you need to change who you are in order to, lead effectively. And so her first 6 months were horrible. And so I worked with her on how to own her happiness, but how to utilize that to be a leader. So, like I said, so for me, it's more really allowing people to get in touch with their foundation and find the power within that to, again, be their entire authentic self.
Cool. That's actually really cool. I think because sometimes, like you say, you lose yourself sometimes in different stages of your life. You're first you're a child, then you're a teen, then you're a young adult if you have family or kids, and so on and so forth. I think every new season of life, you could potentially go off the track of where you thought you were or who you thought you were. So that's really a neat thing to kind of come bring us back down to.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, as we go through different stages, we also hit a different level of expectation. And a lot of times we take those expectations to mean we must change. And there's always adjustment, right? There's always adjustment as you arrive at a new place. Like, okay, I'm now in an executive level. Yeah, maybe I can't come to work with t-shirt and jeans anymore. Maybe I need to start looking a little bit more professional. But it does not mean that you have to change the core of who you are. And so it's a blend of how do you continue to grow but still own yourself and the growth that's coming with it. Because like my tagline is, your personal growth is your executive presence. Like you can't be so great over here, but insecure over here. The two are going to blend and connect. And I've always said that's why, you'll see someone who seems to have risen in the ranks, but they are the way they deal with people is absolutely horrible. We've all had the manager that they're a manager, but they have no connection with their team, or they micromanage. And it's not even the skill, it's the person that has the issue. They're insecure in their personal life. So it carries over into the work world. So yeah, like I said, a lot of times it is the expectations that we get as we continue to grow that for some reason we will twist. And I mean, I've gone through this, that we will twist in our mind and mean, okay, these expectations now mean I must become this person. No, you just must now learn how to meet those expectations as who you already are.
And how can people find you or reach out to you if they're interested in taking this on?
Absolutely. So you can find me on LinkedIn under Dahlia Cummings. My company email is rebelalchemylife.com. I do also have, and that's also on Facebook as well as Instagram. And I do also host my own podcast, which comes from the Rebel Alchemy mindset. And the podcast is called Leadership is Me. And the me is an acronym for my evolution, my execution, and my empowerment. And so it's where I talk to everyday entrepreneurs about their backstory and how they chose to take those tough moments that they went through, but still grow through them to become the person that they are today. And so you can find that podcast on YouTube under Leadership is Me.
Awesome. Thank you. And is there anything you want to add or leave the listeners with today?
Just be who you are. Like there's so much power. My life truly changed the moment I realized that while my journey is crazy, my journey is also very powerful. I spent a lot of years running away from the journey, right? It was like I thought that, not that I was ashamed of it, but I didn't think it was to be used in life. Like I thought it was just, okay, I went through it and keep going. But the moment I said, no, I'm going to not only own this journey, I'm going to put it out in the atmosphere, was the moment that my entire life changed. You are your journey, the good, the bad, the ups, the downs. You are your journey. And if you hold on to that and learn how to just incorporate it into who you are and what you do, and you look at it as strengths versus weaknesses, your world will change. So I just like to encourage people, just own your journey, own who you authentically are, no matter how hard it is. There is a community of people out there that want you authentic and alchemized.
Awesome. Thank you so much for today.
No problem. Thank you for having me.